B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Chagigah Daf Zayin. We're going to start from the very last line on Daf Vav Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Tanan Hossam, we learned in a Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah in Masechet Chagigah, and many of us are familiar with this Mishnah. Elu dvarim she'ein lohem shiur. The following are a list of things that do not have any, they don't have a fixed measure, they don't have a maximum amount of how much you can do it. For example, hape'ah, there's a halacha that when a person is harvesting his fields, he has to leave a section on the corner of the field for the poor people. Then the Torah doesn't tell us how much you have to leave. The Chachamim, they did give us some form of a measure. They said that one should leave a 60th, but according to the Torah, there's no maximum. V'habikurim, how many bikurim, which are the first of the fruits that ripen of the Shivas Haminim that are brought to the Beis Hamikdash, how many, how much, the Torah doesn't tell us. V'horayoin, the Gemara is going to discuss soon. It's obviously going to have something to do with the mitzvah of Re'iyah, either the amount of times that a person can and should come to the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Tov, or it's going to be talking about the korban oilas hariyah, that there's a minimum of one korban one has to bring on Yom Tov. Does one have to bring more? Is there no limit of how many korbanos one can bring oilos hariyah? Ugemilos chasadim, doing acts of kindness. And this is talking about primarily acts of kindness that one does with one's body. With the money, when the amount of money a person should spend, that's already a different discussion. But Gemilus Chasadim, that person does physically, giving of his time, giving of his energy, there's no maximum. The Talmud Torah, and obviously the mitzvah of learning Torah has no limits. Omer Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Kasvurim onu loimer. We suggest to understand that when it says in the Mishnah we just learned, Horayoin, which is something to do with the mitzvah of Re'iyah, of coming to the Beis Hamikdash, Aliyah L'Regel, Ein Lo Shiur L'Malo, it does not have any maximum amount of times that one does Horayoin, Aval Yesh Lo Shiur L'Mata, but there is a minimum amount. And here Rabbi Yochanan is saying that we assume this is talking about the value of how much the korban oila has to cost. And we saw in our Mishnah, according to Beis Shammai, the Re'iyah, the oilas Re'iyah has to be a minimum of shtei kesef. According to Beis Hillel, the oilas Re'iyah has to be a minimum of a mo'o kesef, a silver coin. So that's definitely a minimum, but there's no maximum. That's what Rabbi Yochanan wanted to say. Ad sheba Rabbi Oishia b'ribi, until Rabbi Oishia, who was the god Ladoyer, he v'limed horayoin and said, Ein lo shiur loy lemalo v'loy lemato. He says that the ra'ayon that is mentioned here doesn't even have a minimum requirement and also doesn't have a maximum requirement. And obviously there is a machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, but he says that machlokas is only midrabanon. Min haTorah, there's no minimum amount how much the korban oila has to be worth. Aval chachamim oimrim, the chachamim say hariyah mo'o kesef v'chagigah shtei kesef. And this is not an opinion that's arguing. This is just what the Chachamim said. That means Rabbi Oishia Beribi said, Ein lo shiur loy lemala v'loy lemata. Min haTorah, there's no minimum amount that the oilas hariyah has to be worth. However, the Chachamim said that it should be the oilas hariyah should be mo'o kesef. This is like the halacha according to Beis Hillel in the Mishnah. V'chagigah shtei kesef, the minimum a chagigah has to be worth is 2 silver coins. And now the Gemara is asking, "My hori-oyin, what is this royin? What does it mean? When the Mishnah says that ra'oyin doesn't have a shiur, doesn't have a maximum, what does it mean? Rabbi Yochanan Omar re'iyas ponim ba'azara. Rabbi Yochanan means that there's no maximum amount of times that you can come into the Beis Hamikdash. You want to come over Yom Tov, and you want to come in every day, you want to come in 3 times a day, it doesn't matter, you can come in whenever you want. However, regarding a korban, there is a maximum. Rabbi Yochanan holds you're not allowed to bring more than 1 korban re'iyah over Yom Tov. The first time you come on Yom Tov to the Beis Hamikdash, you bring the korban re'iyah. After that, you do not bring a korban re'iyah. So when it says that ra'oyin is ein lo shiur, then it means the amount of times you actually come to be seen in the Beis Hamikdash. Rish Lakish Omer re'iyas ponim bekorban. Rish Lakish says that even regarding bringing the oilas hariyah, there's no shiur, there's no maximum, and every time you come into the Beis Hamikdash, you bring a korban oilas re'iyah. And now the Gemara is going to explain. Be'ikra regel, on the first day of Yom Tov, then kule alma lo pligi, everybody agrees der iyas ponim bekorban, that when one comes to the Beis Hamikdash, that first time on Yom Tov, one must bring a korban. Ki pligi, where they're arguing, b'shayim ois haregel, what happens when they come in on any other day of Yom Tov? Then kol heicha de osa v'aisi, whenever he comes into the Beis Hamikdash, if he wants to bring a korban, he wants to come in and bring the korban, he's allowed to bring the korban. What's the machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? The osa v'loy aisi. If he comes in on one of the other days, but he comes in without a korban. Rabbi Yochanan savar iyas ponim be'azara. Rabbi Yochanan says that coming into the Beis Hamikdash, he doesn't need to bring a korban every time he comes in. Reish Lakish argues and says that re'iyas ponim bekorban, that means the kol emas de'osi tzarich la'asuyeh, that every time he comes into the Beis Hamikdash, he has to bring a korban. Every day he has to bring another korban oilas re'iyah. And now the Gemara asks, Eisver Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish is asking Rabbi Yochanan, how can you, Rabbi Yochanan, say that you can come into the Beis Hamikdash, kol emas de'osi lo tzarich la'asuyeh, that you can come into the Beis Hamikdash, you do not need to bring a korban? We have an issue with the pasuk. Does the pasuk not say v'lo yiro ponai reikom, that you should not appear before me empty-handed? So you see clearly that when you come into the Beis Hamikdash, you have to bring a korban. Answers the Gemara on Malei Rabbi Yochanan, answer to Reish Lakish, be'ikar haregel. When it says in the pasuk lo yiro ponai reikom, it's referring to the main part of the Yom Tov, which is the first day. And indeed, as we saw on the first day of Yom Tov, everybody agrees that when one comes to the Beis Hamikdash, one has to bring a korban. Now the Gemara is asking another question. Eisver Reish Lakish is asking Rabbi Yochanan another question. It says in the Brisa, v'lo yiro ponai reikom, that when you come into the Beis Hamikdash, then you have to come with a korban, you cannot come empty-handed. Bizvachim. What does it mean you cannot come empty-handed? What do you have to bring with you? Bizvachim. You have to bring animals. Not a bird offering and not a mincha, however it has to be a zvachim. Says the Brisa, continues, Ato Emer bezvachim, you assuming that lo yiroi ponai reikom means that you have to come with an animal korban, maybe not. Maybe it's enough to come with birds or a mincha. V'dinhu. However, there's a logic, there's a svara that says that it should be especially with animals, as the Brisa says, because ne'emra chagigah lehedyot, because we know that the korban chagigah was a korban shlomim, which was appreciated and eaten by a regular person. V'ne'emra re'iyah legavoyar, and then there's the korban oila, the oilas re'iyah, which has to be brought, which is legavoyar, which is for Hashem. As it says in the pasuk, v'lo yiroi ponai reikom, you shouldn't come before me empty-handed. So it seems that when you come to Hashem with the re'iyah, it has to be something which is uniquely for Hashem. So we compare the two. Ma chagigah ha'amura lehedyot zvachim, in the same way as the korban chagigah, which is clearly for the benefit of the people, it's talking about a proper animal korban, as it says in the pasuk, v'lo yolin chelev chagei ad boiker, that the fats of the chagigah should not be left overnight, and they have to be put on the mizbeach. So you see that it's a type of offering. The chagigah is a korban that has fats, it must be an animal. So too the korban that is brought when coming into the Beis Hamikdash, lo yiro ponai reikom, it's assumed that it's zvachim. And now the Gemara is saying, all we know is that lo yiro ponai reikom, don't come empty-handed, and we compared it to chagigah, that the same way as chagigah, which is for a private person, for the individual person, and that was the korban shlomim, which was an animal. So too, lo yiro ponai reikom, you come with an animal, but we don't yet know which animal. We keep speaking about the oilas re'iyah because that's the conclusion, but the Brisa doesn't know that yet. So the Brisa says, umahin zvachim, which animals do you have to bring for your re'iyah when you come into the Beis Hamikdash? Oilos. The Brisa assumes that it's a korban oilah. Says the Brisa, Ato Omer Oilois, are you going to suggest that why should it be Oilois? Oyeinu elo shlomim, maybe it's a korban shlomim, and also an animal, but not an oilah. Says the Gemara, no, v'dinhu. Logic dictates that we again compare chagigah to re'iyah. Nemra Chagigah lehedyot. It says that the Korban Chagigah was brought for an ordinary person on Yom Tov. V'nemra Re'iyah lo gavoya, and it says that the Korban Re'iyah lo yiroeh ponai reikom, that's something which is for Hashem. Ma Chagigah ha'amura lehedyot. In the same way as the Korban Chagigah that was said for the person, Baroi loi, is a Korban that is fit for him, which is a shlomim, which is eaten by the person who's bringing it. Af re'iyah ha'amura lo gavoya, so too the Korban Re'iyah, which is brought for Hashem, baroi loi, so to speak, is a korban which is uniquely for Hashem. What would that be? That would be the korban oila, which is completely put on the mizbeach. V'chein bedin, and there's another logic to back that up, and that is shelo yehei shulchan chamolei v'shulchan rabcha reikom, that when you're eating your korban shlomim, it would make sense that the Mizbeach, so to speak, the Hashem's table is full, that the Mizbeach is burning a whole korban, which is the korban oila. Now the Mefarshim explain that what the Gemara intended to ask is that from these final words, Shelo yehei shulchan chamolei v'shulchan rabcha reikom, that your table shouldn't be full and your master's table be empty. It seems that whenever you have on your private table, you have korbanos, make sure there's a korban on your master's table, on the Mizbeach. Now we know that the mitzvah of Simcha is every day of Yom Tov, and every day of Yom Tov we eat the Shalmei Simcha, something we're going to learn about more a little bit later. So we have the Korban Shlomim, so it would seem that every single day, or at least every time you come into the Beis HaMikdash, make sure that in the same way as you have meat on your table with the Shalmei Simcha, that you put something on Hashem's table, so to speak, and you bring a korban oila. And this is contrary to what Rabbi Yochanan said before, that one can come into the Beis HaMikdash without bringing a korban oila. Answers the Gemara, Omar Le, Rabbi Yochanan answered to Reish Lakish, again here too, Be'ikar Haregel, where the Brisa is primarily talking about the main part of the Yom Tov, which is the first day, and on the first day, indeed, make sure that your master's table, Hashem's table, the Mizbeach, it has got an oila on it, and the same way as you have your Shalmei Chagigah. However, but the Shalmei Simcha, which you have the whole of Yom Tov, the rest of Yom Tov, that's not regarding those days. We have this logic of that Shelo yehei shulchan rabcha reikom, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan says we have no proof from that brisa that you have to bring a korban re'iyah every time you come into the Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara is now asking another question. Eisvei. Now this is another question Reish Lakish is asking Rabbi Yochanan. You, Rabbi Yochanan, said that you're allowed to come into the Beis HaMikdash every day of Yom Tov, and you do not have to bring a korban oila suriyah, you only have to do that the first day. Eisvei. We're going to ask this against this from a brisa. Rabbi Yisi b'Rabbi Yehuda oimei, Shalosh regalim b'shana, there are 3 yomim tovim in the year. Nitzdavu Yisrael lalis b'regel, on these 3 yomim tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, b'chag hamatzos, b'chag Shavuos, and b'chag Sukkos, one has to come to the Beis HaMikdash for oila regel. V'ein nirin lechatzoin, we'll see in the Gemara what that means, but v'ein nirin lechatzoin, they should not appear in parts, in groups. Mishum shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, kol zuchorcha, all the men should come to be oila regel, and not just part of them. Don't come in groups. We'll soon see what that means. And also continues the brisa, v'ein nirin reikonim, they should not come into the Beis HaMikdash empty-handed. Mishum shenemar v'lo yirou ponei reikom, as it says in the pasuk that you should not come into the Beis HaMikdash empty-handed. So how can you, Rabbi Yochanan, say that you can come into the Beis HaMikdash without a korban oila for the rest of Yom Tov? It just says in the brisa here, v'ein nirin reikonim, you should not come empty-handed. Omar Le, again Rabbi Yochanan answers to Reish Lakish the same answer as before. Be'ikar haregel, we're talking about the main part of Yom Tov, the first day of Yom Tov, and indeed on that first day everybody has to bring a korban oila. The rest of Yom Tov, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that would not be necessary, and even if you come into the Beis HaMikdash, you do not need to bring a korban. And now it's Rabbi Yochanan's turn to ask Reish Lakish a question. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. You, Reish Lakish, say that every time you come into the Beis HaMikdash, you have to come with a korban oila, an oila suriyah. We have an issue with that. The pasuk says Yiroeh Yireh. We've already seen that. The pasuk says that one comes into the Beis HaMikdash to be seen by Hashem, and so to speak, to see Hashem. And we've learned earlier on in the Masechta some halachas about that. But here the brisa says that we're comparing the way we see Hashem and the way Hashem sees us. Ma'ani b'chinam, the same way as I, Hashem, am seeing you for free. Hashem doesn't need to come to the Beis Hamikdash, so to speak, and bring a korban. Af atem b'chinam, so too, when you come to see me, says Hashem, you can come b'chinam, you can come free of charge, you can come with nothing, you don't need to bring a korban. So how can you, Rish Lakish, say that every time you come into the Beis Hamikdash you need to bring a korban? It seems here from the Brisa, not like that. And this question Rish Lakish doesn't manage to answer. Elo, we have to change the definition of their argument. Till now we saw in the Gemara before that the Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish was they all agree that you're allowed to bring the korban. The question is, do you have to bring the korban? Rabbi Yochanan says that you don't have to, and Rish Lakish says you do have to. And now we're changing that. Elo kol heicha de osa v'loi aisi de kule almaloi pligi de ayil umischazi v'nofik. Everybody agrees that you do not have to bring a korban. Even Rish Lakish agrees you do not have to bring the korban. Ki pligi de osa v'aisi. The question is, if he does bring a korban, do we accept it from him? Rabbi Yochanan de Omar Re'iyas Ponim Ba'azara. Rabbi Yochanan said that when it says that the Ein Lehem Shiur Horayoin just means that there's no shiur for the amount of times that you come into the Azara, that Re'iyas Ponim Hu De'ein Lehem Shiur, it's only the amount of times you come into the Beis Hamikdash that doesn't have a measure Ha Korban Yesh Lo Shiur. However, regarding the Oilas Re'iyah, you're not allowed to bring more than one korban. Rish Lakish Amar Re'iyas Ponim B'Korban. Rish Lakish says that Ein Lehem Shiur is even talking about the korbanos. That filu korban nami Ein Lehem Shiur. That if you want to bring a korban, there's no minimum amount of korban oilas re'iyah that you bring, and if you want to bring a korban every time you come in, you're allowed to. So you asked a question before, Yeroa Yire Ma'ani B'Chinam Af'ata B'Chinam, 100%, because everybody agrees that you do not have to bring a korban. The whole discussion is, are you allowed to bring a korban? Says the Gemara, Eisvei. Rabbi Yochanan is again challenging Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish said that if you want to bring as many korbanos as you want, you're allowed to. But does it not say in the pasuk, Hoikar raglocha mi beis re'echa, that let your foot be scarce in the house of your friend, of your beloved, so to speak, the Beis Hamikdash, which means to avoid coming into the Beis Hamikdash bringing extra korbanos. And you, Rish Lakish, say you can bring in Ein Lehem Shiur, you can bring as many korbanos as you want. Answers the Gemara, no. Hosam b'chatois v'ashomis. This that it says that Hoikar raglocha mi beis re'echa, that you should not come into the Beis Hamikdash and bring lots of korbanos. That's only talking about a chatos and an osham, which are brought for people who did averos. And there, with the Chazal are telling us, the pasuk is telling us, avoid doing averos even by mistake. It seems that a person can be extra careful, try and avoid even making mistakes, in order that you shouldn't have to come to the Beis Hamikdash to bring a chatos and an osham. However, the korban oilas re'iyah, we have no issue, and you can come as often as you want. Could Rabbi Levi? The Rabbi Levi Rami. This is similar to what Rabbi Levi said. Rabbi Levi asked an apparent contradiction. In one pasuk it says, that let your feet be scarce in the house of Hashem, in the Beis Hamikdash. Don't come and bring korbanos too often. Or in another pasuk it says, that I will come to your house with korbanos oila, with oila offerings. So it seems that coming with the korban oilos is something which is lekatchila, something which is encouraged and is okay. And what did Rabbi Levi say? Lo kashi, it's not a contradiction. Kan b'chatois v'eshomis, regarding those korbanos that come consequent to averos, the chatos and the osham, indeed you should find every which way to make sure you don't have to bring those korbanos. Kan ba'olos v'shlomim. However, regarding the korban oilos and the korban shlomim, of course it's good to come into the Beis Hamikdash. Tanya Namihachi, there's also a brisa to this effect. Hoikar raglocha mi beis re'echa. This pasuk that says that your feet should be scarce in the house of Hashem and avoid having to bring korbanos, b'chatois v'ashomis hakosav medaber. That's only talking about chatos and asham, which are korbanos brought for averos. The Brisa says, Ato Omer b'chatois v'ashomis. You're assuming that the pasuk of Hoikar raglocha mi beis re'echa is talking about chatos and asham, or ye'enu elo ba'olos with shlomim. Maybe even oilos and shlomim you should avoid bringing more than the minimum you have to. No, because says the Brisa Kashu Omer when it brings the other pasuk, when it says Ovoy Veischav Ba'olos Hashalim L'chonadore, when it says that I'll come to your house, the Beis Hamikdash, with korban oilos, and I'll pay for my vows. Hari oilos Shlomim Omer. So you see clearly that to bring oilo and shlomim is a positive thing. If so, how are we going to understand the pasuk that says that you should avoid coming to Hashem's house with korbanos? The pasuk must be referring to korban chatos and korban asham, that only those should be avoided, and hence there's no question from to the opinion of Rish Lakish, who says ein lohem shiur means the korban oilas riyah you can bring as many as you want. And now we're going back to a couple of words in a previously mentioned brisa. It says there that when they come to Aliyah L'Regel, ve'ein nirin chatzoin, they shouldn't come in groups. Like it says, Kol Zuchurcha, everybody should come together. So the Gemara now says, Sover Rav Yosef Lemeimer, Rav Yosef considered explaining, what does that mean? That man de'is le'asara bonim, if somebody's got 10 sons, lo ylisku ha'idnu chamisha, you shouldn't take 5 to the Beis Hamikdash one day, u'lemachar, and the next day, chamisha, to bring another 5 sons. Rather, you should bring all of them the same day. That's how Rav Yosef assumed is what the Brisa meant when it says, ve'ein nirin chatzoin, they shouldn't come in groups. Omale Abaya said to Rav Yosef, no. Pshita, that would be obvious, that when you have a family of 10 sons, you shouldn't split them up. Because which 5 of the 10 are you going to make them poishim, negligent, and delay coming to the Beis Hamikdash at the first time they can? And which ones are you going to make them diligent and fast and zerizim to come the first possible time? So how are you going to split them? You have no way of doing that, and therefore of course you would bring them all up together. If so, what's the Brisa impressing on us when it says that ve'enirin chatzoin, they shouldn't come in groups, in parts? It says Elo Krolemai also. So Abaya says, what's the pasuk coming to teach us that we learn from Kol Zuchurcha? They all have to come together. Look at the Achirim, to what Achirim teach us. To Tanya, we learned in the Brisa Achirim Oimrim, and we've actually seen this before. Hamekamitz, if somebody is gathering together the excrement of dogs to process the leather, Vamatzarif Nachoshes, and those who are working with the copper, the abursi and the tanner, and all these are works which the person working in them doesn't have such a good smell, and since he doesn't have a good smell, it's inappropriate for him to come in as a group together with all his other brethren going up to Yerushalayim, and therefore Paturim and Arayah, they're actually totally exempted from the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel. Shenema Kol Zuchurcha. From this pasuk we mentioned that Kol Zuchurcha, all the men should come together. Misha Yochi Lalisim Kol Zuchurcha, only somebody who's able to come up together with everybody else, then they are required in Aliyah L'Regel. Yotzu, and this excludes Elu she'ein yochelim la'alosim Kol Zuchurcha, anyone who cannot come up with everybody else because of the bad smell that they have, and indeed they are exempt, and that's what the Brisa meant, that ve'ein nirin chatzoim, that the Klal Yisrael should not come up in groups, which means anybody who has to be on his own, not together with everybody else, is exempt from Aliyah L'Regel. Continues the next Mishnah. Oilois b'moed korban oilois, which is referring to the oilas ra'iyah, which is brought on Chol HaMoed, and we're going to discuss that in the Gemara because the oilas ra'iyah is a korban that belongs to the first day of Yom Tov and not necessarily Chol HaMoed. We're going to have to discuss that. Bo'is minachulin, there has to be money that belongs to the owner himself. He cannot use Ma'aser Sheni money and redeem it because what's Ma'aser Sheni? A person has to bring Ma'aser Sheni to Yerushalayim and buy with it food in Yerushalayim and eat a betara with Yerushalayim. So this person might say, I've got Ma'aser Sheni money, I have in any case have to buy foods with it, I'll buy with it the oilas ra'iyah, and so to speak, I'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I won't need to have an extra expense of buying the oilas ra'iyah. Says the Mishnah, no, boys menachulin, it has to be money that is chulin and not Ma'aser Sheni. V'hashlomim, however, the korban shlomim, the shalmei simcha, that through Yom Tov, the mitzvah of a samachta b'chagecha, a person has to be happy. And how do you do that? In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it was with eating the meat, the flesh of korbanos. and that's called the Shalmei Simcha. Shalmei Simcha, they can be purchased with Ma'aser Sheni money. And now the Mishnah is going to discuss the Shalmei Chagigah. Yom Tov Arishon Shel Pesach, the first day of Pesach, and this is not the exclusion of Shavuos and Sukkot. This is the Shalmei Chagigah, which is the first day of any of the Shalosh Regalim. The Gemara is going to discuss why the Mishnah singles out Pesach. And there, Beis Shammai hold min hachulin. The Shalmei Chagigah have to be brought with the private money, not with Ma'aser Sheni money. Or Beis Hillel argue and say min ha'maiser that the Shalmei Chagigah, even though it's a chiyuv to bring the Shalmei Chagigah, nonetheless one's allowed to bring it with Ma'aser Sheni money. Now, coming back to the chiyuv of Samachto b'chagecha, you have to be happy. And how are you happy over Yom Tov? That's by eating from the korbanos. So Yisrael, the regular Yisrael, not necessarily the Kohanim, Yotzim Midei Chivasam, they can fulfill their obligation of Simcha on Yom Tov b'nedarim u'nedavis, with those animals that they had to, through the year, they were required nedarim nedavis to bring to the Beis Hamikdash. They bring them over Yom Tov, and Chol HaMoed they shech them, and now they have meat to eat over Yom Tov. It's the flesh of korbanos, and they can fulfill their requirement of Simcha with it. Uba Ma'aser Behema. And also Ma'aser Behema, there's a halacha that every 10th animal is brought as a korban, and there too they can use the Ma'aser Behema, eat the Ma'aser Behema animal, the korban Ma'aser Behema, they can eat it over Yom Tov, and that way they can be Mekayim their Simcha. V'kakoyanim, and Kohanim have an added way of being able to fulfill their obligation of Simcha on Yom Tov. It's either b'chatois v'ashomis, when people come and bring chatos and oshom animals, then the Kohanim, they're the ones who eat those animals, and they have now meat from the animals with which to be mekayim their Simcha. And also from ubi b'choir, the firstborn of the kosher animals are also brought as a korban, and the Kohanim eat that. And ubechaz of a sheik, and the breast and thigh of shlomim, korbanos shlomim, which also are given to the Kohanim. And these are all parts of animal korbanos which the Kohanim get, and they can eat that, and that way they've fulfilled their requirement of simcha. However, when it comes to bird offerings or mincha, then they cannot be used. That means eating those would not work to fulfill their requirement of simcha. Says the Gemara that, and the very beginning of the Mishnah we learnt, it said oilois b'moed, that the korban oilois is brought on Chol HaMoed. It seems not on Yom Tov. Bois min hachulin, they cannot be used, they cannot be bought with redeeming Ma'aser Sheni money. So the Gemara is now coming to town with the very first statement that the oilos are b'moed, that the korban oila, the oila suriyah, is brought on Chol HaMoed, and it seems that the korban oila suriyah, which is brought on Chol HaMoed, are brought from chulin money, not Ma'aser Sheni. It says the Gemara, Ela oilos b'moed hu debois min hachulin. Can we deduce from the Mishnah that the oila suriyah that's brought on Chol HaMoed has to be brought with a person's private money, ha b'Yom Tov min ha'maisa? But if somebody brings the oila suriyah on the first day of Yom Tov, then it doesn't have to come from chulin. He can use Ma'aser Sheni for money. Amai, why would that make sense? Davar shebachoivahu. We know that the korban oila suriyah is mandatory. It's a choiv, and v'chol davar shebachoiva einei bo'enu min hachulin. You're not allowed to use Ma'aser Sheni to buy things you have to buy anyway. You have to buy extra things with it, things that are food in Yerushalayim that you're not required to bring. Oila suriyah is a chiyuv, and if it's a chiyuv, it should always have to be brought only from chulin, not from Ma'aser. Why does the Mishnah say that the oilos b'moed bois min hachulin, that the oila suriyah, which are brought on Chol HaMoed, they are the ones that have to come from chulin, not from Ma'aser? Are you going to suggest Ha'kamash Malon that the Mishnah is coming to teach us the oilos b'moed bois b'Yom Tov einon bois? It could be that an oilas ru'iyah always has to come min hachulin, not min ha'maisa. So why does it mention b'moed? Maybe to impress on us that you're only ever allowed to bring an oilas ru'iyah on Chol HaMoed. On Yom Tov you're not allowed to bring a korban oila. And maybe that's what the Mishnah is coming to tell us. Says the Gemara, Kaman, who would that be following? Beis Shammai, that would be following the opinion of Beis Shammai. Ditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah. Beis Shammai omrim, maviim shlomim, that on Yom Tov you're allowed to bring a shlomim korban, because a shlomim, the person who's bringing it actually benefits from it and eats from it. Ve'ein tzemchin alein, even though normally one does smicha, one leans on a korban before bringing it, but there's an Issur D'Rabbanan to lean on an animal on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and therefore if you're bringing the korban shlomim on Yom Tov, one does not do smicha. Avaloi oilos, but according to Beis Shammai, one's not allowed to bring any korban oila on Yom Tov because the person has no personal benefit from it. It goes completely on the mizbeach. And Beis Hillel argue and say mevim shlomim v'oilos. One's allowed to not only bring shlomim, one's even allowed to bring korban oila on Yom Tov. Since there's a mitzvah to lean on them, the Chachomim didn't say that the issur of leaning on an animal applies to the korbanos. So you see here clearly that Beis Shammai, the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether can you bring an oila on Yom Tov? In which case, if our Mishnah that says oilos b'moed bois minachulin is there to impress on us that the korban oila can only be brought on Chol HaMoed, not on Yom Tov, that would be following the opinion of Beis Shammai, not the opinion of Beis Hillel. Why would our Mishnah be doing that? And if you're going to say that the Mishnah means that only those oilos that are brought on Chol HaMoed have to be bois minachulin, well, why would that be true? It's a davar shebachayva. Says the Gemara, you actually have to read a few extra words into the Mishnah. And you have to understand the Mishnah as follows. Oilos nedarim or nedavois, either a korban oila or korban nedarim and nedavois, which are other oilos. It means those oilos which are nedarim and nedavois, which means you didn't have to bring them. Just a person made a vow to bring them. He has to bring them. He doesn't have to bring them on Yom Tov. Then b'moed bois. Indeed, those korban oilos can only be brought on Chol HaMoed, even according to Beis Hillel. The whole machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is oilas re'iyah, because the Yom Tov is what requires him to bring the korban oila, and therefore, according to Beis Hillel, you can bring it on Yom Tov. But those oilos which are nedarim and nedavois, everybody agrees they can be brought on Chol HaMoed, not on Yom Tov. But Yom Tov ain't on boys. You cannot bring them on Yom Tov. V'oilas re'iyah, however, the korban oila, which is the oilas re'iyah, which is brought because of the mitzvah of aliyah l'regel on Yom Tov, bo'ah fila b'Yom Tov. As Beis Hillel said, you can bring such a korban oila even on Yom Tov. Ukashehiba, and when it's brought, whenever the korban oilas re'iyah is brought, it cannot be with Ma'aser Sheni, it can only be with chulin, with money which is his personal money. V'shalmei simcha, however, the korban shlomim, which is brought just for the sake of simcha, boin af min ha'maiser, there you can buy the korban shalmei simcha even with Ma'aser Sheni money, because the truth is that there is no requirement you have to bring a shalmei simcha. There's a requirement to be b'simcha, and any korban you want to eat, you can bring, you can have as your simcha. And therefore, if I bring a korban of Ma'aser Sheni money, there's no issue. I'm using Ma'aser Sheni money to bring a korban, that's okay, and then that's the korban I'll eat for the shalmei simcha. And therefore, you can use the Ma'aser money for the shalmei simcha. However, the Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, but the korban Chagigah, the shalmei Chagigah, which is brought on the first day of every Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, there's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai omrim min ha'chulin, it has to be brought from chulin, and Beis Hillel omrim min ha'maiser. Beis Hillel say it can be brought from Ma'aser Sheni money, and we're going to understand that a little bit more soon. Tanina mihachi, we can even bring a brisa that has the same reading as the words we've just read into our Mishnah. That oilos nedarim and nedavois, those oilos which are nedarim and nedavois, b'moed boys, they can only be brought on Chol HaMoed. To bring a korban oila where you have no personal benefit on Yom Tov, that's something you're not allowed to do. B'Yom Tov ain't on boys, you cannot bring them on Yom Tov. However, v'oilas re'iyah, the korban oilas re'iyah, bo'ah fila b'Yom Tov, can be brought even on Yom Tov. Or kushehi bo, whenever it's brought, einei bo elu min ha'chulin, it can only be used, but it can only be bought with money which was chulin. V'shalmei simcha boin af min ha'maiser, the shalmei simcha one can use even meat that was Ma'aser Sheni, a korban of Ma'aser that was bought with Ma'aser Sheni money. Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, and the korban Chagigah, the shalmei Chagigah, which is brought on the first day of Pesach or Shavuos or Sukkot, Bishamai Omrim min Chulin. Bishamai say it has to be unconsecrated money, or Bishilel Omrim min Maisa. Bishilel say it can even come from Maisa Sheni money. And now the Gemara is going to discuss why, when mentioning the Machlokes Bishamai and Bishilel regarding the Shalmei Chagigah, can it be brought from Maisa Sheni money or only from Chulin? Why does the Brisa and the Mishnah stress the Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, bringing Pesach? Why are you singling out Pesach? Ma'ishno Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. Is it to exclude Shavuos and Sukkot? Of course not. Answers the Gemara Omer Ravashi Hokomash Malon. The Mishnah and Brisa are trying to impress something on us. The Chagigas Chamisha Osor in that this whole machlekes we saw here is only regarding the Korban Chagigah, which is actually brought on the Yom Tov itself, that comes from the Yom Tov, the Shalmei Chagigah of the 15th of Nisan, and it's the same Shalmei Chagigah as the 15th of Tishri on Sukkot and on Shavuos. However, regarding Nisan, it's to impress on us that it's that Chagigah which is the Yom Tov Chagigah, the 15th of Nisan Chagigah. That is the Chagigah that we have this machlekes, and according to Beis Shammai, it has to come from Chulin and not from Maisa Sheni, to teach us that Chagigas Arba Asar Loi, that the day before the Korban Chagigah that was brought on Erev Pesach, just in order that all the people that are eating from the Korban Pesach should be able to be eating the Korban Pesach on a full stomach and not in a state of being very hungry. They would, if there were too many people then, and there wasn't enough of the Korban Pesach itself to fill everyone up, then they would bring the Korban Chagigah on the 14th of Nisan, and there everybody agrees that one can use Maisa Sheni money from it, and even Beis Shammai will agree that it does not have to be Min HaChulin. And now we have to understand, why should it be that way? Why should the Chagigah, which is brought on Yom Tov, that has to be from Chulin, but the Chagigah which is brought on Erev Pesach, that is allowed to be from the Maisa Sheni money? Alma Kosova, can we deduce? It seems from here we can deduce the Chagigas Arba Solav Deraisa, that there isn't really a biblical obligation to bring this Korban Chagigah. If it was a Mamash Chiyuv, an obligation that to make sure that when one eats the Korban Pesach, one is actually satisfied by it and doesn't remain hungry, and if there's too many people, then you have to have the Korban Chagigah. If that would be a biblical requirement, then anything which is a choiv would have to be done, would have to be with Chulin money, not from Maisa Sheni. You cannot use Maisa Sheni to relieve yourself of an obligation that you had. However, it seems from here that Chagigas Arba Osor is not Minat Torah. Since it's not Minat Torah, then you're allowed to use Maisa Sheni money for it. Continues the Gemara. Coming back to that brisa we mentioned before, Omar Mar, Bishilel Oimrim Mina Meiser. We saw that the Shalmei Chagigah, there's machlokes between Bishilel and Beis Shammai whether the Shalmei Chagigah can be brought from Maisa Sheni money. Beis Shammai said no. Bishilel said you can bring the Shalmei Chagigah with Maisa money. And here there's a big question, Amai, why should that be the truth? Dovo shebachoivahi, the Chagigah, you have to bring the Shalmei Chagigah. If it's a choiv, if it's mandatory, then you cannot use Maisa Sheni for that. So how can you use Maisa money to buy the Chagigah, the Shalmei Chagigah? Answers the Gemara Omar Ula B'Teufel. We're actually talking about a case where it's just a supplement, which means that the same Korban Chagigah that you're buying, part of the money is private money, is not Maisa Sheni money, and part of it is Maisa Sheni. So Beis Hillel say you're allowed to also add Maisa Sheni money in order to buy the Shalmei Chagigah. And now there's going to be Machlokes Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan exactly what this word Teufel means. Uda says that when Beis Hillel say you're allowed to use Maisa Sheni money for the Shalmei Chagigah, then it means you can supplement Maisa Sheni to the Chulin. So Chizkiah says Teuflin Behema LeBehema, which means that if you had one animal that was brought with Chulin money, then you can bring another Chagigah, Shalmei Chagigah. If you're bringing more than one Shalmei Chagigah, you can bring a second Chagigah with Maisa Sheni money. Ve'ein toiflin mo'is lemo'is. However, when buying any one Shalmei Chagigah, you cannot mix Ma'aser Sheni money with the private money in order to buy the animal. So even though he's buying a big animal and not just a small animal for his Chagigah, but since this is the Chagigah that he's fulfilling his requirement with, he's not allowed to mix Ma'aser Sheni money with it. However, if you're buying a second animal, that second animal can be an animal that is bought from Ma'aser Sheni money. That was Chizkiah's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan argues and says, Toiflin mois lemois. On the contrary, that when buying any one animal, you can add Ma'aser Sheni money to the chulin money when you're buying the korban. Ve'in toiflin behema lebehema, but to have a korban chagigah, which is even a second one, to have any korban chagigah that's bought exclusively with Ma'aser Sheni money, that's something which according to Rabbi Yochanan is not allowed. Now the amount of money that has to be from private money and not from Ma'aser Sheni money, that is like we saw in the Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechta, that is according to Beis Hillel, the 2 silver coins, the 2 silver mo'is, which is the minimum amount for the Chagigah. So that's as much as he has to spend from his own money. If he wants to buy an animal that costs more than that, according to Beis Hillel, he's allowed to add and bring and pay for it with Ma'aser Sheni money. And now the Gemara is going to bring a brisa to both these opinions. Tanya Kavasei de Chizkiah, Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Yochanan. In the brisa we're going to see that you're allowed to be toiflin mois lemois. You can add Ma'aser Sheni money to a Chagigah, but you cannot buy a whole Chagigah with Ma'aser Sheni money, because it says in the brisa, misas, which is a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Vasiso chag hashvois l'Hashem elekecha," that you should have the Yom Tov of Shavuos for Hashem. Misas nidvas yodcha, with the tribute, which is misas of your nidvas yodcha, voluntary korban, a voluntary offering, ashetitin, that you're going to give, kashi varchecha Hashem elekecha, as Hashem has blessed you. So this word misas, which is a tribute, seems to be that you're bringing money from your own money, not money which belongs to Ma'aser Sheni. From the word misas, a tribute, you see that a person has to bring this korban from chulin, from his own private money, min hachulin. How do you know? What would be a source that if you want to mix with the chulin money, you want to mix Ma'aser Sheni money, that it's okay? Talmud Loimer. That's where the pasuk continues. Kashi avrecha Hashem alekecha, that you can use anything that Hashem has blessed you with, and since Hashem has also given you Ma'aser Sheni money, you can add that in. Now the words le'oriv, which means in the brisa le'oriv, that if you want to mix, then you can't mix an animal together. You can mix money together. So the brisa that speaks about mixing in Rotzel Ma'oriv, it clearly means that you can mix Ma'aser Sheni money with the chulin money to buy a korban chagigah, and that's the proof to Rabbi Yochanan that says that toiflin mo'is lemo'is. Tanya Kavasei de Chizkiah, another brisa which follows Chizkiah, and that is that you are toiflin behema lebehema, that any one animal, that means the first animal you're bringing as a chagigah has to be exclusively with Ma'aser Sheni, with chulin money. If you want to bring a second animal, the second animal can be from Ma'aser Sheni. It says in the brisa the same word misas, melamid she'odom mevi chivosei min hachulin, that you see from this pasuk a person has to bring those mandatory offerings, they have to be brought from min hachulin. It's got to be misas. It's got to be a tribute that's coming from him. Bishamai Omrim, another brisa is going to bring a machlekes. Bishamai say Yom Rishon min hachulin, the first day, the chagigah that you're bringing on the first day, that has to be min hachulin. Since on the first day the chagigah is a chiyuv, is a choiv, so Bishamai say on the first day you have to use only chulin money. You cannot mix in any Ma'aser Sheni money. Mikan ve'elech, but if you're going to bring korbanos for the rest of Yom Tov, which is not talking about the Shalmei Chagigah, it's talking about the Shalmei Simcha, that's something else. Mikan ve'elech, the korbanos you're bringing for the rest of Yom Tov, you can bring min ha'maisa, you can use Ma'aser Sheni money. That was Beis Shammai's opinion. Or Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel argue, and they say achila rishoina min hachulin, the Shalmei Chagigah that you brought at the beginning of Yom Tov, that's got to be brought min hachulin. Mikan ve'elech. However, even on the first day of Yom Tov, when you're talking about the Shalmei Chagigah, but beyond the Achila Rishona, beyond the very first consumption, the very first Chagigah, Mena Meiser, there you can even use Meiser Sheni money. So here it seems to be quite clear in the Brisa, Achila Rishona means the first animal. The whole first animal has to be exclusively Chulin, Mikan Ve'elech. Any other animals, they can be even from Maisa, which is how Chizkiah learnt, and this is the Brisa like Chizkiah, where Chizkiah says that any one animal has to be exclusively from, that means the main animal has to be exclusively from Chulin, and afterwards you can bring extra animals which are from Maisa Sheni. So finishes the Brisa, V'shar kol yimei Pesach, all the rest of the days of Pesach, not exclusive Pesach, but even Sukkos, Odom Yetzu Yidei Chivosoi, Meiser Behema, the Shalmei Simcha that are brought for the rest of Yom Tov, which is the rest of the days of Pesach and Sukkos, they can be used with Meiser Behema, and it does not have to be from Chulin. And now the Gemara asks, B'Yom Tov my tam eloi? Did we not see before that Beis Hillel said that only Achila Rishona, the very first Chagigah, has to be from Chulin? Any other Korbanos Chagigah that are added even on the first day on Yom Tov one can use Meiser Sheni money from it. So if so, then why can he not use Meiser Behema as his Korban Chagigah, as the second Korban Chagigah? In the same way as you can use Meiser Sheni money, why can't he use the Meiser Behema? That's how Rashi seems to explain the question of the Gemara, and the Achronim say that Rashi, for the same token, could have explained that if for Shalmei Simcha you can use Meiser Behema, why is that only for the rest of Yom Tov? Why can't you bring that on Yom Tov itself? Bring a Meiser Behema. Why only Shar Kol Yimei Pesach? But either way, however we understand the question of the Gemara, why is the concept of using a Meiser Behema animal, either for Shalmei Simcha or for the second Shalmei Chagigah, why only on Chol HaMoed, on the rest of Yom Tov, and not on Yom Tov itself? Omer Ravashi explains, Dilma Osil Asure B'Yom Tov. We have a problem with that, because if you're going to allow a person to use Meiser Behema, which is every 10th animal, which is a korban, Meiser Behema, you're going to allow him to use it on Yom Tov proper, we're afraid maybe he's going to actually separate the Meiser on Yom Tov, V'yefshel Asir B'Yom Tov. There's an issue of separating the Meiser Behema on Yom Tov, Mishum Skarto, because how do you make it Meiser? The animals go through a very narrow doorway, one at a time, and the 10th one puts some red dye on it, on the animal, and that's what dedicates it and says, this is the 10th animal, this is a korban. You're not allowed to do that dye on the animal on Yom Tov, and therefore we're afraid that you're going to take the Meiser Behema on Yom Tov, and therefore we do not let the Meiser Behema be used on Yom Tov. And now just one last point, says the Gemara. We mentioned before in the Brisa, in both Brisas, that the word misas, which is a tribute, seems to mean that a person is bringing it from his own private money, not from Meiser Sheni. My mashma dahai misas lishna de chulinhu. Why is it true that the word misas actually means that it's chulin? Answers the Gemara D'chsiv, because it says in the Pasuk, Vayosem HaMelech Achashverosh mas al HaMelech, that the king Achashverosh, he levied a tax, a mas, on the people of the land. And the word mas, which is taxes, has the same letters as misas mentioned in the Pasuk, and taxes are clearly taken from a person's private money, and you don't give Meiser Sheni money to pay taxes. And therefore, from the similarity between tax, the mas, and the misas, we understand that the misas is only from chulin money, and that's how we learned before, that anything that's brought from that mlamich odom mevi chivosei, when a person brings a mandatory korban, it has to be min hachulin. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to continue from here.